For some business news, Nigeria's oil production increased month-on-month by 1.9% from 1,235 million barrels per day in December 2022 to 1.258 million barrels per day in January 2023. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries revealed this in its monthly oil market report. According to the report, Nigeria surpassed Angola that produced 1,050 million barrels per day to become Africa's leading producer, while Equatorial Guinea came last with 55,000 barrels per day during the period. Also, the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission latest oil production data shows 178,313 barrels per day of condensate oil for December. This brought total oil production to 1.415 million barrels per day during the month under review. Amid Naira scarcity, mobile transfers records 108 million transactions in January, highest since its inception. Latest data from the Nigerian Interbank Settlement System reveals that a total of 108.14 million transfers were made in January, while the value of mobile transactions in September 2022 stood at 2.37 trillion naira. Now, the value, or a breakdown shows the value of transactions via mobile money declined marginally from 2.48 trillion naira in December, but rose by 44% to 1.05 trillion naira in January 2022. Also, volume of transaction via instant payment dropped by 3.5% in January to 542.65 million from 561.31 million in December 2022. However, the transaction volume and value had risen by 55% and 45% respectively in the month under review. The confidence index of chief executive officers in the manufacturing sector declined marginally in the fourth quarter of 2022 from 55.4 points to 55 points in the third quarter of 2022. Well, this was revealed in the Manufacturers CEO Confidence Index report of Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. Also, the report shows that the index scored a pulp, paper, printing and publishing sector and the motor vehicle and miscellaneous assembly scorecard, sector scorecard recorded 49.6 and 48.4 points respectively, which fell below the 50 points benchmark. The decline was due to recent challenging operating conditions ranging from persistent increase in the consumer price index, continuous erosion in the Naira value, difficulty in sourcing forex for productive use, high cost of energy, the issue of insecurity to the lingering Russia and Ukraine war. The federal government says the foundation for a resurgent economy has been laid in the past 8 years. Minister of Works and Housing, Mr. Babatunde Raji Fashola, said this during an interactive session. Government officials and members of the organized private sector and the business community in Lagos. We have more for you in this report.
Members of the business community and organized private sector, federal and Lagos state government officials are gathered in this room to dialogue on key economic issues that will keep Nigeria steady on the progressive lane. Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu takes his time to highlight his theme's agenda and how impactful it has been over the years.
Lagos continue to remain as a driving force of our country. Lagos continue to be the rising shine of our country. And so the question we need to ask ourselves as we make the decision in the next couple of days is, what are the alternatives? What are the other things others are talking about? Nigeria cannot be an experimental trajectory. You cannot come into the highest leadership position of our country with people that do not have the experience, with people that have not worked it, or with people that cannot show who are the people that they have trained, who are the people that have worked with them, who are the people that they have grown, who are the leaders that they have built, who are the people that have learned the rope.
The major roads that connect Lagos to Ibadan, Lagos to Badagry through Ogun, Lagos through Ikorodu to Shagamu, are all receiving attention. Those roads had no attention for 16 years. They are being attended to in half the time that it took the opposition to ignore them for 16 years. That is the choice before you. And we hear about production and all of that, and I say that I don't know any economy that produces without roads and bridges, that produces without ports. So you talked about the Lekki Free Zone, the Lekki Port. All of those were initiatives started by the APC government in Lagos State for national prosperity.
The panel session stayed on issues bordering on infrastructure development, sustainable development goals, post-COVID-19 economy to immigration of Nigerians.
The ISDG model that we launched in 2019 with all our governors, Governor of Lagos was part of the launch, is a very strategic document that we use to integrate and domesticate SDG into sub-national government policy plan and programs. As we speak now, we're working on 22 states, so that everything that we do, from budget preparation, budget implementation, budget analysis and reviews, reflects the spirit of SDGs.
We would require, public investment in the order of 350 trillion naira in public investment, and that it's only about 50 trillion of that is projected to come from government. The rest of it needs to come from the private sector. So the discussion we should be having, the conversation should be, what more does government need to do to enable the private sector weigh in to that degree? Because without that, we will not see the growth levels that we require.
The take-home at this gathering is that with a symbolic relationship between the government and the organized private sector, the economic drive of Lagos and the federal government can be strengthened and sustained.
Well, Asian stocks fall as dollar was barely higher today after data showed U.S. consumer inflation stayed sticky in January, pushing out expectations for a Federal Reserve's rate hike in pause. MSCI's broadest index of Asian Pacific shares outside of Japan was down 1.4%, led by drops in more than 1% in Australia and Hong Kong. Japan's Nikkei shared average sank, reversing a small early gain as S&P 500 futures dropped 0.4% in Asia, while the Wall Street stocks ended mixed yesterday. The dollar index against the major currencies was steady at 103.4. The Australian dollar eased a bit to 69 cents, even as central bank's Governor Philip Lowe said rates would need to rise further to contain inflation in remarks to a parliamentary committee. U.S. consumer prices accelerated in January as Americans continue to be burdened by high costs for rental housing and food. But the annual increase was the smallest since late 2021, pointing to a continued slowdown in inflation and likely keeping the Federal Reserve's on a moderate interest rate hike path. The Labor Department disclosed that consumer price index increased 0.5% last month after gaining 0.1% in December. Data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration shows that monthly inflation was boosted in part by rising gasoline prices, which increased 3.6% in January and 0.7% rise in the cost of shelter, accounting for half of the monthly increase in the CPI. The CPI increased 6.4% year-on-year and 9.1% in June, which was the biggest increase since November 1981. Moderation in price pressures reflects higher and tighter monetary policy, which is weighing on demand as well as improved supply chains. The UK inflation rate fell to hit 10.1% for the third month in a row in January, below expectations. But high food and energy prices continue to put pressure on the British households. Latest data from the Office of the National Statistics shows that core CPI, excluding food, energy, alcohol, or tobacco, was 5.3% compared to 5.8% in December. Data also showed that workers continue to lag behind inflation, with growth in average total pay at 5.9% amongst UK employees between October and December year-on-year. However, central bank has moved its main rate to 4% and anticipated annual CPI inflation would fall to 4% by the end of 2023. Well, crude oil prices extend losses today as a much bigger than expected surge in U.S. crude inventories and expectations of further interest rate hikes sparked concerns over the prospect of a weaker fuel demand and economic recession A U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude fell to sell at $77.81 with a downward price review of 1.45%. Brent crude futures also experienced a downward price margin of 1.29%, selling at $84.48 per barrel. Bonnie Light sells at $85.29 with a decline of 0.64%. And for the OPEC basket, crude oil dealers are offering $84.23 with an upward price review of 0.80%. Well, that's business at this hour. I'll see you at the top of the hour to talk more business. And news just in is also, we tell you that pockets of protests in Ibadan, Delta, and some states, of course, against the Naira redesign policy. And not the policy that much at this time, but the scarcity of the notes. That is what is actually happening. Yes, you have live pictures there on television where this is happening, where roads are blocked and people can't even move about their day-to-day activities because they cannot access new notes. They cannot access the old notes. According to CBN, it's no more a legal tender, and the new notes are nowhere to be found.